Hello, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this class today, to watch the replay. Today's class will be pretty much just a lecture, as none of our students could make it this time. And we are going to be talking about how to train your loved ones through empathy, clarity, and advocacy. My name is Adina Barlow, and I am a life coach who teaches you how to have an amazing relationship with yourself so you can have a wonderful relationship with everybody else. So there are about 10 principles you'll learn today, and I will give you examples of each principle. But essentially, training humans how to train you or how to treat you is very similar to training pets, training dogs anyway. I don't know that you can train cats very well. And of course, some pets or like, let's imagine dogs. Some dogs are going to have a lot of trauma, or they're going to be very clingy, or they're going to have their own characters. But ultimately, when you look at a pet, you often think like, okay, they just need trained, instead of, oh, they're evil or malicious or whatever. They're responding based on what they know how to do and what you have trained them to do. Now, a lot of the training that we'll talk about isn't necessarily conscious training, unless you have already thought about it this way and started to try to train your people how you want to be treated. A lot of it just kind of happens. So today we'll take the mystery out of how that just happens and we'll go into how to make it happen. So first of all, signaling is huge. Before we learn verbal language, we know body language, and we know the language of action. If we look at animals in the wild, they're constantly watching each other and other animals to see what they do. Because the truth of how somebody will be is demonstrated in their actions. And so the people around you, consciously or unconsciously, watch your actions to see how to treat you. So when you signal to another person by either your body language or your actions, you are training them. I'll give you an example of some mixed signaling I used to give that contributed to people not taking me seriously. And I sort of felt like they didn't respect me, or I thought they didn't respect me, when in actuality, they didn't know how to treat me because I was giving them mixed signals. So I used to be very uncomfortable with anger, the emotion of anger, whether it was from somebody else or my own anger coming up. And if I would feel angry, especially, I would try to soften it by smiling and by laughing. Can you imagine somebody recognizing that I'm angry about something when I'm smiling and laughing? No. No. They think that whatever interaction we're having, I must enjoy it because I'm smiling and laughing. So what I learned is that when I'm angry, I need to show that in my body language, to be like, that's not cool. Or, hey, what you did there really hurt. Or just my simple no. Like if somebody's doing something that I feel angry about, stop it instead of smiling. So giving clear signals is critical for your people. It helps them be clear, and really, like, most people want to treat you well because we are wired as social beings to want to belong. And so when you're happy and you're connected, then they're connected. And so people want to treat you well, but often they don't know how, or they're so confused that they just can't figure it out and they give up. So when you give those clear signals of what's okay and what's not okay, of what your emotions are based on your body language and your facial expression, it actually really helps your loved ones know how to treat you. Another thing is clarity. And this is like, okay, exactly what are they doing that's working for you or not? So if we were to say, if I were to say, I think people are disrespectful to me, that's not super clear, because what disrespect is to me might be different than what it is to you. An example is, for me, I feel really upset and hurt when somebody tells me they're going to be there at some like location and time. We have a meeting. They say they're going to be there and then they don't show up. I feel hurt and I think that's disrespectful. But maybe for them, they might have texted in last minute and be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I just can't make it. And so for them, since they alerted me, they told me they couldn't make it, in their mind, they might have respected me. So if I'm just sort of vague and say, I want people to respect me, that's not clear. But if instead I know that when I book an appointment with somebody, I want them to show up or renegotiate like 24 hours or a few hours in advance, unless it's an emergency, that is clear. Another example might be if I want somebody to play softly with me. Let's say I'm playing with one of my nieces or nephews, and I ask them to play softly with me. They might not be clear what soft is. So maybe they're like bouncing around and jumping all over me or something. And to them, that's soft. Who knows? But to me, it's not. So I need to be clear with them and say, no, don't jump on me. You can sit next to me. You can hang on my back. You can touch my arm or something like that. I need to be clear with them what soft means. So let's imagine that you want your loved ones to speak kindly to you. It's kind of vague. Like, we can guess what kind speech is, but you kind of need to teach them what kindness means to you. So let's say somebody is like, oh, great example. I'm here in Berlin, Germany, and many folks here are rather gruff with their responses in their body language. They might have, not everybody, but some might have a little scowl or something on their face. And it's not out of unkindness or even unfriendliness. It's sort of just more of a cultural thing, as far as I can tell. And so if I think they're not speaking kindly to me because of their gruff voice, I might be totally mistaken. So let's say one of your loved ones is blunt with you. They might believe that that bluntness is kind. And so you can help them understand, like, hey, for example, I would really prefer it if you asked me a question instead of assume that I'm doing something I'm not. That would be kind if you could ask me instead of tell me what you think I'm doing. Ask me what my intention is with what I'm doing. That would be kind to me. That's offering clarity. And this can be pretty difficult because for you to be clear with another person, you have to be clear with yourself. You've got to think about, like, okay, if I were writing a manual, perhaps, on how to speak kindly to me, what would I need to write in it? What would I need to tell my students? And so it makes you think and get clear with yourself. And when you have clarity, you can absolutely offer that clarity to your loved ones. And what a gift that is. So clarity is critical. And then the other piece is actionable. If you ask somebody to do something that they can't actually act on, they're just going to be frustrated or overwhelmed or feel powerless. So an example is an old sweetheart of mine many, many years back was really upset with me one time, and he accused me of having energetic hooks in him. I was so flustered because A, I had no idea what to do with that information, and B, that's kind of impossible. I mean, I have energetic hooks, like, for my mind, yes, somebody could interpret maybe a feeling of tension or something, like whatever their feelings is, they can interpret it. Like, he interpreted that as an energetic hook, but for me, there was nothing I could actually do about that information. And so I just became angry and frustrated. So as you're training people how to treat you, it needs to be actionable. So I'll give you another example. Timeliness, as I mentioned earlier, people showing up when they say they will, is really important to me. And so my current sweetheart, when we were first dating, there were a couple of times when he was quite late to a date that we had set, like 20 minutes, 30 minutes late, which for me is just unacceptable. And so I expressed how upset I was, and that, hey, I make sure that I'm here on time, and that I've prioritized this time that we've set together, and I need the same from you. And so, and there were like 3 different times in a few years that he was quite late like that. And each time I expressed that and asked him to be on time or to negotiate beforehand, renegotiate. And so that clarity of, and the action, the for him to be able to act on it, it gave him the confidence to say, yes, I can do this, or no, I cannot do this. Another dear friend of mine cannot do that. And so we negotiated a different strategy where we would set up squishy dates. So they were like, the time was squishy, which meant it's around the time that we set, anywhere between like half hour before or after that time. Cool, that worked. It sort of helped me understand, okay, that's her availability, but it also addressed my need for that predictability of like, okay, this person's going to show up for me at some point. But we were able to talk about it and create an actionable plan for it. So whatever it is that you want somebody to do differently, make sure it's very clear and that they can actually act on it. Okay, next is boundaries and follow through. In order to set boundaries, you have to know what you want and what you don't want. A lot of us don't quite know those things. We don't know what we want and don't want. And so it's impossible to have good boundaries because they're kind of moving all over the place. And then the other people around us, they don't know what our boundaries are because they're moving. So learning and deciding what you want is important, and it's also a journey. Sometimes you will bump up against something that you really didn't like, and then you can recognize like, oh, that's a boundary of mine. I do not like that. Cool. Now you know. And before you knew what that boundary was, or the other person knew what that boundary was, they just didn't know. And so try to offer a lot of patience to yourself and the other person for not knowing that boundary, because y'all just found it. And so once again, it's not that they're malicious or trying to hurt you. It's that they didn't know and you didn't know. So really like compassion and patience with yourself. But when you do discover those boundaries, then you can communicate them and follow through. So when you're willing to say no, you can also say yes. And without the ability to say no, you cannot truly say yes. For example, let's say you have some friends who love to party, and maybe you don't love to party, but you do love to be with your friends. And somehow you think that in order to be with your friends, you have to go to the parties that they are inviting you to, but you're kind of miserable there. So you go to these parties, but then you don't have a good time. And eventually you feel disconnected and resentful. In that case, saying yes to the thing that you didn't want, or rather, since you didn't have the practice of saying no, or even like thought it was a possibility to say no to that thing, you're not actually saying yes to showing up and engaging with your friends. I mean, you're there, but not fully, not like wholeheartedly and feeling wonderful about engaging with them. So if instead you just know like, okay, I don't like parties. So for me, I really don't like bars. They're too loud. There's just too much going on and I can't really connect with people. So if somebody invites me to a bar, I say no, but I'm happy to go get some tea together, or I'm happy to go to a quiet restaurant, or I'm happy to have dinner at my house. So when I say no to going to the bar, it opens the door to say yes to these other kinds of engagements with my friends that feel better to me. If I were just going to the bars with friends, like I said earlier, I wouldn't really be showing up. So, and this especially applies to intimate connection, even with a long-term intimate partner, if I cannot or will not say no to having an intimate engagement with my sweetheart, then I can't fully say yes. It's okay to say no. And it can be super, super scary. Like, especially if you grew up in a household where no was not okay. Like in my household as a child, if I said no to one of the adults, I was punished. And so I was trained that no is not a word I get to say. And so as an adult, when I started having sex and intimate engagements with people, I wouldn't even consider if it was something that I really wanted. I knew I wanted the connection. And sure, it could be fun. Sometimes, though, it actually hurt because I wasn't fully there or prepared or whatever. And no wasn't in my language. I wasn't practicing saying no. When I started to practice saying no, I was so scared. I thought, oh, they're not going to love me. They're going to totally disconnect. They'll never want to be intimate with me again. That wasn't actually true. they um, they responded usually very respectfully. And if not, we stopped dating. So your willingness to get uncomfortable and say no is a essential part of training people how to treat you. Now, if you say no, but you go ahead and do it anyway, it's worse than not saying no, because you're training your person or your people that your words don't matter and they don't need to take you seriously. So let's take it back a notch and say, let's say for your family, you tell them, okay, I'm willing to make dinner for you if you show up for dinner by 6 p.m. And let's say they meander in at 6:30 or maybe 7, dinner's cold, or let's say you want to share chores. Like, okay, I'm willing to make dinner if you're willing to do the cleanup. So you make dinner and then they don't do the cleanup, but you believe you're obligated to make dinner the next time. And so even though they didn't show up or they didn't help with the cleanup, you still made dinner the next time. That's worse than setting the boundary in the first place, because you have just trained them that they don't have to listen to you, that you will give them what they want without them following through on what you just asked. So instead, and this is the really hard part for some people, follow through on your word. If they didn't show up and didn't help the next night, don't make dinner for them. Go out to eat by yourself or make dinner for you. And yeah, that's going to feel really uncomfortable. Or maybe they don't like you making dinner and they would prefer to make their own. That might be a harsh realization, but at least it would take that work off of your plate. So at least the honesty and the follow through will help you have those boundaries and train other people to take you seriously. One example is, like, let's say you loan money to a friend or family member and you have an agreement that they pay you back at a certain time, or that you charge them a late fee. Or maybe, like, I mean, I guess with friends and family, you might not have that set up to charge a late fee or whatever. But let's say they borrow money from you, they don't pay you back, and then they're in dire straits again later, and they ask to borrow money from you again, promising that they'll get it back to you. If you loan them that money again, you have essentially trained them that they don't have to follow through and pay you back. So if instead you want to just give them money as a charity, cool, do that, but be clear with them and yourself that that's what's happening and that you're not loaning them money. Whereas if you have loaned them money with an agreement that they pay you back at a certain time and they don't, then you can bring it up like, hey, you told me you'd pay this back at this time. What happened? And then, maybe they have excuses, etc. Okay. But then next time they ask to borrow money from you, no. That's the difficult, uncomfortable part, is acting into your no. It's that follow through. And especially with kids, oh man, kids are fabulous at testing your boundaries. And here's the thing, they desperately need boundaries. They need to know where their limits are. If they don't know, they're going to be more emotionally upset because it's too much responsibility for them to try and figure it all out. They need that structure and support. So they need to know where your boundaries are. And sure, they will test it and try to push it down or up against it. That's okay. That's part of them testing their world. It's just like, little babies put everything in their mouth to taste it. That's part of how they test the planet, just everything goes in their mouth. So as they get older, they're constantly pushing those boundaries to be like, is this the edge? Is this the boundary? And it's not because they're bad. It's just nature. That's fine. Hold your boundaries. Like, no, nope. Okay. So advocacy is a big part of training people how to treat you. Self-advocacy is communicating your boundaries. It's telling people what you need and what you're feeling, and maybe asking for a specific action. So it's similar to what we talked about earlier with the clarity, the actionable things, and the boundaries. But the self-advocacy comes from a place inside of you that where you have determined, I am valuable enough to advocate for my needs or express my feelings and advocate for what I'm needing. And it's also from this place of knowing your self-worth, so that if somebody is unwilling to treat you the way that you would like to be treated, repeatedly, they're just not, they're not willing to treat you well when you have been very clear. Part of that self-advocacy is walking away. It's having a different relationship. It's changing that relationship dynamic or the roles that you play. But it's part of that follow through of acting on the things that you want and need. And so you're communicating through words. Again, you're saying, this is what I want, this is what I want. But you're also communicating through action, just like we talked about earlier. Now, sometimes it takes repetition to train somebody how to treat you. An example is my father. So he was quite abusive when I was little. My mom put him in jail, and he got out about 7 years later. And at that point, I decided I want a relationship with him, but on my terms. And he wanted that as well. He wanted a relationship with me. So I expressed to him that, yes, I would like this relationship, and it needs to be a kind of relationship that feels good to me. And so he I sort of had to figure out along the way what behaviors he was doing that were still hurtful or painful to me, and then train him out of it. And one of the main things that he did was he would speak down about my other siblings in front of me, or he would tell me about things that he didn't like that they were doing. And that broke my heart because I love them. And it's not my job to mend their relationship. And so I would tell him, like, Dad, I don't want to talk about that. And if he kept it up, I would say it one more time. Hey, I don't want to talk about that. And if he kept it up, I would walk out the door. So he would know that's not what I want to talk about. And it took some repetition. It took like 3 or 4 times over time for him to really get it. And then he would start catching himself. He'd start talking down about somebody and be like, oh, you don't want to hear about that. I'm like, nope, I don't. So I had to be consistent in what I was willing to engage with. So repetition is okay. Be willing to put some repetition. Now, if it's like, I don't know, if it's so many times you've been clear and they're still not willing to change their behavior, that's when it's like, okay, maybe it's time to do something else, to not have that relationship, or to change the relationship dynamic or something. But you don't have to be in that relationship. And you might think you have to, but you don't. So if somebody wants a relationship with you, they've got to be willing to do their 100% of their 50% of that relationship with you. You can only do 100% of your 50%. And then they've got to do the rest. If you're trying to compensate because they're not willing to work with you and develop a win-win relationship, that's not when you need to be in. And when you say no to that relationship, you can open the door for other people who will treat you well and who want to treat you well. But as long as you're dumping energy into this person who's unwilling to put energy back, you have closed the door to the other potential relationships that are much better and more enjoyable for you. So part of self-advocacy is the power of no. One of my weight trainers years ago had this t-shirt. It was just a black t-shirt, and on the front it said nope. And I loved it. I loved it because I was still learning and practicing how to say no. And she would do that too. If there was something she didn't want to do, she'd just be like, nope. And she wouldn't do it. And I had so much respect for her because I knew where she stands. She trained me and the other people around her that she is okay with specific things, not okay with other things. And there wasn't any like talking her out of it. So that was great. Tony Robbins, in a conference I went to one time, says, you get what you tolerate, not what you want. And I've absolutely seen that. Because the thing is, if I tolerate somebody yelling at me or calling me names, even if I ask them not to, if I tolerate it, and I'm still like showing up to that relationship and trying to treat them nice, like, oh, maybe if I just treat them nicer, they'll stop yelling at me and calling me names. No, that's not how it works. If I tolerate that behavior, it's going to continue. In a lot of domestic violence, it's kind of a slow burn. Like you might tolerate being yelled at, you might tolerate being called names, then you might tolerate being shoved, then you might tolerate being hit. You might tolerate somebody controlling who you talk to, or taking your phone and looking at all your messages. So it's like this slow toleration that it leads to the other person treating you very badly, but it also leads you to believing that it's not so bad. In a book called The Gift of Fear, I forget who it's by, but The Gift of Fear, he talks about how people end up in domestic abuse situations where the partner tries to kill them. Like it's that bad. Or maybe they have shot them, maybe they've beat them so badly that they're in the hospital. And he talks a lot about this gradual increase of tolerance of poor behavior. And essentially, the person, like the victim, unfortunately, in tolerating what's the other person is doing, is training that person that it's okay, and then training themselves that it's not so bad, or that they don't have any options. And then of course, like this person often comes in and it's like, you're not good enough, you're a piece of shit, and and then like takes away resources and stuff. So it becomes this terrible cycle. That's for another class altogether. But the less, even more innocent tolerance can lead to resentment or overwhelm or burnout in a relationship. And so being clear and consistent about what you'll tolerate or not is just really critical for your relationships. And again, it's words and actions both together. Okay, so as we're advocating for what we want, communicating boundaries, being clear, having actionable items, we need to demonstrate in the positive. If we're always saying like, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, it's really hard for the other person to know what to do. It's just a whole bunch of don't do this. And so an example of that is I have a 3-year-old nephew who has boundless energy and loves to roughhouse. Love it. He does really well outside, not so well indoors, where he can break things or like hit things with sticks or whatever. And the way that he likes to play is very rough, and he loves his face played with. I hate it. And so he would try to play with me and he would just mess with my face. And at first I was like, stop it, I don't like that. And then I would do it to his face and I'm like, do you like that? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, well, I don't. But he didn't get it until one night I decided, okay, I need to show him what I want instead. So he would do the thing with my face and I'd be like, hey, nope, you can touch my arm, you can bounce on my legs, or you can hit my legs, or you can climb on my shoulders. And he was like, okay. And then he did those things, like, oh, great. And then I would play with him. And then he would go to do the thing with my face again. I'm like, nope, I don't like that. You can touch my arm, you can bounce on my legs, you can get on my back. And he's like, oh, okay. And then I think it was 3 times that I had to tell him that night. But eventually he was playing with me the way that I enjoyed. And then he enjoyed it more because I was connected, we were engaged, we were both having fun, instead of me sitting over here being like, stop it, stop it, stop it. So demonstrate in the positive. Teach people how you want them to treat you by showing them or telling them what to do. So the timeliness thing. Now, often when I set an appointment with somebody, I tell them, okay, if you need to cancel or reschedule that, please give me a 24-hour notice. If it's a client, I have a consult or a cancellation policy where I charge the full appointment fee or half the appointment fee if they give me less than 24 hours notice, and the full appointment fee if they give me less than 3 hours notice. And that I communicate with them clearly before their session, like when they set up the session. So telling people what they could do or should do is much easier for them to then follow through with than just saying like, don't be late or don't cancel last minute or yeah, it's just harder for our brains to process a don't than it is to process a do. So demonstrate the positive. And then this is where it gets juicy. Demonstrate by how you treat yourself. So if, for example, you push yourself super hard and you're like, let's say you're taking care of a household and you also have a job. So let's say you get the kids off to school first thing in the morning, and then you have to go to your job, and then you come back and you need to make dinner and put everybody to bed and then do the house chores and all of that. But you have a partner, a second parent, who's also supposed to do a lot of that stuff. If you push yourself to do all those things and you're like, well, I have to do this stuff to be a good parent, or even at work, if you are taking on all these projects and you're being like, yes, I'll do this, yes, I'll do that, yes, I'll do this, because you're trying to be good enough or hustle for worthiness or show that you deserve to be there at that job, people are going to give you more work. And it's a vicious cycle because you then become overwhelmed, burned out. You believe that, say in the case with your partner, that your partner's unwilling to help, or at work that nobody understands how much you're doing and nobody respects you for what you're doing. But you have pressured yourself to do all of those things to earn worthiness or to be good enough, to be a good parent or be a good employee or whatever. When you take the pressure off of yourself, it's much easier for other people to take the pressure off of you also, because you are demonstrating what you want and what you'll tolerate and what you expect. So let's say you expect to have some time to relax at home. And so you simply don't do some of the house chores. You just let it go. Well, then it opens up space for the other people in your household to pick up the slack, to then do that job. And then if the house gets so messy that people are uncomfortable, y'all can have a conversation about splitting up the chores more evenly so that you can still have time to relax. Or let's say at work, if you are adamant about taking your time with a project to make sure that you complete it well and thoroughly before taking on another project, then you will say no to those other projects or be like, I'm finishing up this other one. As soon as I'm finished, I can totally take on this project. Or you can negotiate with your boss or whatever, but you have decided that it's important enough for you to do this project well and thoroughly before taking another one on, because you're unwilling to do it half-assed. So you are demonstrating how they should treat you, and then they will do that too. Let's say if you if you believe that you're a bad person and don't deserve love, or that you have done something bad and you do deserve to be called names or yelled at, you will tolerate that and you will train the other person that that's okay because you believe it. If, on the other hand, for example, if a friend of mine were to call me a bad name, were to call me a disrespectful name, something that I felt hurt by, I would tell them right away, hey, don't call me that. And if they wanted to continue, if they were teasing me or wanted to continue that, I'd be like, that's really not fun for me. I don't like that. If they continued, I would walk away because I will not tolerate that. I don't like how I feel when somebody calls me names that are demeaning, because I won't do that to myself. So of course I'm not going to let them do that. But if I have a habit of calling myself names of like, oh, you're stupid, or oh, you're just a girl, or, like if I have a habit of putting myself down, I am much more likely to allow others to put me down, even if it's just teasing, but it still hurts. And so when I change that relationship to myself, I'm changing what I tolerate, I'm changing how I'm treating myself. So therefore my actions, my body language, and my facial expressions all will be different. They'll be more in alignment with the way that I feel about myself, and other people are going to pick that up. So treat yourself with loving kindness. Okay, last thing, and that is empathy. Empathy is an acknowledgement and recognition of what another person or yourself is feeling and experiencing. It's not fixing anything or anybody. It's not tolerating poor behavior. It's simply recognizing and acknowledging what another person is feeling or experiencing. So if, for instance, a good example, one of my colleagues recently expressed disappointment in something that happened because of something I neglected. And immediately, of course, I felt like, oh no, I did a bad. And so I had those emotions that came up. And then I was like, okay, yep, there's that like fear of disappointing people. There's that's pretty typical. And so I felt through that. And then I was like, yes, this other person felt disappointed because they missed out on an opportunity based on my neglect of this situation. I would feel disappointed too. And so then I expressed back to them like, yeah, that's super disappointing that you put this stuff into trying to make this happen. And by an oversight on my end, it didn't work. Like this wasn't, you weren't able to do it. And I'm sorry. So acknowledging his disappointment and acknowledging that he put a lot of effort into trying to make this happen, that was empathy. And that's all he needed. He was totally like, okay, yeah. And of course, like we talked about how I'll do it differently next time, but that empathy was critical. So when somebody is treating you poorly, it's not because they're bad. It's because they are trying to meet some of their own needs. And if you are willing to get curious about what needs they might be having or feelings they might be having that are influencing how they're treating you. You'll be much more likely to discover a way that you can co-create, like you can co-create a different strategy to get their needs met and your needs met at the same time. However, if you believe they're a bad person or that they don't love you or they don't respect you, or like you put this judgment on them, wherever there's judgment instead of empathy, it blocks our capacity to negotiate or to co-create a strategy that could work to meet both of our needs. So empathy instead of judgment will try and get out of the model of right and wrong and into the model of feelings, needs, and strategies. It helps us think more clearly and negotiate instead of fight. So the stories that you tell yourself are a critical part of that ability to be curious or to have judgment. So let's say if a friend shows up late to a meeting, or maybe they don't show up at all, and the story I'm telling myself is like, they disrespect me, they don't appreciate my time, blah, 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 blah. I have all this judgment, and it blocks my ability to be like, I wonder what's going on for them. And then it changes my attitude and actions toward them. If on the other hand, I could be curious and be like, I wonder what's going on. And then I can ask them like, hey, is everything okay? Maybe they had a terrible fight with their spouse and totally forgot about our appointment. And they feel terrible because of course they respect my time. It just slipped their mind. Or maybe they got in a car accident, or maybe their kid got sick and they had to take them to the hospital. Like, in this place of judgment, I don't even give myself the opportunity to find out, because I've already decided that they don't respect me. So part of empathy, part of the practice of empathy, is replacing judgment with curiosity. What's going on for them? And finding out what their needs are. That also helps to have it helps to be able to see other people's perspective. So empathy is that last piece. Thank you so much for the time that you've spent here in this class and watching this replay. Thank you for all the work that you do and that you have done for yourself. And I really encourage you to continue. It really makes a difference, and it takes time and practice, and that's okay. Our next Emotions Masterclass is Saturday, August 13th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, and we'll teach about how to pull yourself out of loneliness and engage with your community in ways that feel good. Head on over to adinabarlow.com if you want any more support. I've got podcasts over there. One-on-one coaching is available, and you can learn how to plug into the community. Thank you again. Cheers.